Hi, I'm retired NYPD Detective Vic Ferrari, and welcome to NYPD Through the Looking Glass podcast, where you get unique insight into the New York City Police Department. Before we get started, I encourage you to check out my Amazon author page, where you'll find my series of behind-the-scenes NYPD books. They're $10 paperback or $2.99 ebook download, including my latest NYPD Behind the Blue Wall of Silence. I launched it yesterday, and it's out available in ebook form, $2.99. Check it out on Amazon. Today's guest is a retired FBI agent and author of a great book, A Cop's Son, One G-Man's Fight Against Jihad, Global Fraud, and the Cartels. Kenneth Strange, welcome to the show.
Vic, thanks so much for having me on your show.
Oh, pleasure's mine. Ken, please introduce yourself. Tell our listeners a little something about yourself.
Yeah, certainly. So I'm a retired federal investigator. I had a federal career, about 21 years with three distinct and distinguished federal agencies. The first being the FBI, the second, the Agency for International Development, and finally, the Department of Justice, Office of Inspector General. So that was my federal career. I'm originally from New York City, from a little place that your listeners probably have never heard of, called Brooklyn. I was one of five. I'm the oldest of five kids. My dad was a New York Police Department officer, 38 years. He had a storied career, and so we started out in Brooklyn. We moved to Long Island, and since then I've been just about all over the world. I think I've been to 65 countries and speak a few languages, including Brooklynese.
Did you ever, with a dad as a member of the NYPD, did you ever consider becoming a New York City police officer?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, between us, my dad was my hero, and so my world growing up was full of police officers, NYPD police officers, and so he would take us over to the precinct and pick up his paycheck, and then he would introduce us around, and we would go to police athletic league functions and police barbecues, and if they ever needed a right fielder, a terrible right fielder, they could always depend on me, Strange's kid, to go out there and right field, that type of. So, my world was full of cops. Loved watching police movies, Serpico, French Connection. I was into all that, and I said, "Dad, I want to be like you." And he said, "Well, son, you've got college, you got a college degree, and it's not just NYPD. You can do that in other places, such as the FBI or the DEA or other places. So you should consider all of it." All of it. But I've always had a soft spot in my heart for NYPD.
Your dad was part of a motorcade that took the Pope to Yankee Stadium.
That's right. That's right. Well, it was kind of funny because I remember that, and this was, I think, the Pope's first trip to the United States, and it was going to be at Yankee Stadium, and so we all, the family, I think it was four of us because one was a baby, but my mom and the rest of us huddled around this little black and white television. That's him. No, that's him. Oh my God, they all look alike. So that was a big day for us, and he came home with some beautiful photos of the whole event, and it was a seminal moment for us as kids.
You went to Nazareth High School in Canarsie in Brooklyn, right?
Yeah, I did.
Canarsie has produced some of the mafia's most proficient killers, including, well, it's true, including the Gemini twins, Joey Tester and Anthony Center. Were they around the neighborhood, or did you hear about them growing up, or was there a mafia presence around Canarsie?
Right. So, I actually was bussed out to Canarsie, to Nazareth. The closest school to me was actually James Madison High School, which was a public school, which was just a few blocks away. But, Nazareth was a Catholic school. And so to get to that Catholic school, I think we had to jump on the bus, and there were two stops. I just remember that the kids from Canarsie, this was just my impression, they were pretty tough guys. They were pretty tough guys, but we're all in school, and if we messed up and if we got into fights or anything like that, the monks, the brothers would beat us up too. So, but as far as the mafia presence goes, I had a neighbor, maybe two or three doors down, and there were rumors that he was in the mob, and probably was. I just remember that they had these huge parties in the summer in the backyard, and all these cars would roll up, and people from out of town would go. So, I'd say, "Hey, Dad, you know what's going on over there?" He goes, "Don't worry about what's going on over there."
Out of college, you learned several languages and you decide to go to Saudi Arabia for a while where you wind up teaching the royal family. That must have been an experience.
Yeah, it was crazy. And I remember, my first job out of college was teaching Spanish and English at the LaSalle Military Academy on Long Island. And it's interesting the doors that open up to you during your life, and you choose whether you want to go through the door or not. I kind of felt that I didn't really have much of there was not much else I could do except stay with my parents, live with my parents, and I was making $8,200 a year plus lunch, free lunch. So, and these were difficult times. It was a recession, there was an oil embargo. It was a very interesting time. So when this opportunity came up, I jumped at it, and my parents were happy for me, and it was time for me to get out on my own and to experience the world. And so my experience in the Middle East was a bit different too, because I show up and it's a school for the Saudi Arabian royal family. So now I'm rubbing elbows with princes, greater princes, lesser princes. But on the weekends, I'm in the palaces. I'm at King Faisal's palace, and I'm hanging out. I'm actually teaching football, American football, to the prime minister's son and his friends. So it was a pretty interesting experience.
At some point, you were invited to attend a beheading. How did that come about?
Yes, that popped up. This was a friend of mine. He was an Egyptian businessman. He lived downtown near the mosque, the great mosque in Riyadh. And right next to the mosque, they have a square. It's called Dira was the name of the square, but it was nicknamed Chop Chop Square. Chop Chop Square. To give you an idea of what would take place on Friday after prayers, right? So this fella said, "Hey, Ken, there's going to be this beheading. Want you to come. I have a balcony. I have we can sit and watch it." And it's pretty interesting because this is a police officer who kidnapped and raped and killed a young boy. So this will be especially interesting. They have a big black guy that comes out with a huge sword, and sometimes they'll do a clean cut, and if they don't like, or they hated the subject, they'll hack him up a few times, a few chops, to make it as painful as possible. And I said, are you kidding? Thanks for the invitation, but I'm going to decline, because, if you see something like that, Vic, I don't think you can unsee it after that. So I declined it. Didn't do it.
Yeah, it's like he's inviting you to a Super Bowl party. Yeah, we got a great view.
Yeah, let's have hummus and pita bread and maybe, Bebzi, as they used to call it, Bebzi in the Arabs would say.
You got a great story about you almost got involved with a princess.
Yes, that full of testosterone. Not a lot of dating apps out there at the time. Kind of secluded in your own teacher's villa, and yes, she walked into my life, and I I was kind of juggling with death, maybe a beheading myself, and I'm a beautiful woman, absolutely beautiful. And speak English fluently. She was interested in me. I was interested in her. But fortunately, cooler minds prevailed. Other teachers that I worked with said, "No, this is not where we want to go here. We all live together. You're inviting not only danger and trouble for yourself, but for us as well. So, you could be deported, arrested, beheaded, any of those things." I finally, and she, this princess was, "Oh, you got to take me everywhere. I want to go to all the expat parties, and I want to dance, and I want to have fun like Western women." And oh no, that's not. Anyway, I understand she didn't end up doing well, and she was committed to maybe a psychiatric hospital. And the boyfriend, who was a French professor, Mark, he was arrested and deported. So that could have happened to me, and thank God it didn't.
Or worse.
Or worse, or worse.
I had a friend that worked for Sperry as an engineer, probably around the late 70s.
Yes.
And he told me that when he traveled to Saudi Arabia and he was there for months at a time, absolutely no alcohol and no pornography. And that's like Playboy, I'm talking. And if they caught you with that, they would throw you in jail. And he said, they're a bunch of engineers, intelligent guys with a lot of spare time on their hands. Some
Right.
of them started making hooch. And he goes, "Are you out of your mind? Like, if they find this and they figure out what this is, they were afraid of a beheading or getting thrown in jail or whatever consequences."
Right, right. Well, Vic, that's interesting you say that, because You can imagine, I'm there just a few months, my first year, and a friend of mine says, "Hey, there's a party over at this villa that's with a bunch of Brits, the people from the UK." So I said, "Yeah, sure." Yeah, I'm
Right.
living this monastic existence, school villa, nothing going on. All of a sudden, I show up at this British villa at night with my friend. Open the doors, and there's a party. There's expats in there. There's a party. There's men and women, and there's a bar. There's a bar in this villa. This fella, let's call him Ian. Ian is serving drinks. What we did not know at the time was that Ian was running. He was making his own stuff, hooch, and he was selling it in Riyadh, which was very dangerous. And in the end, he was arrested. He was thrown in jail, and then he escaped the jail. He's like one of the only people that ever escaped the jail. He and another person escaped it, and he wrote a book, and I have the book from that jail. The jail was called Aould, and I think he was the only, he and the other guy, only foreigners to ever escape this prison. They made their way overland to the coast, and then they went in a boat at night. They jumped in this little boat, and they made their way 12 miles by boat to the island of Bahrain and found the British embassy and got asylum. They made it out, and I was there. I could have been picked up with these people. So, but also, the Saudis, those that knew the Western ways and had money, they also had stuff available inside their homes, but they just did it quietly and within their homes, their
That
palaces.
story, that guy you knew, Ian, sounds like Midnight Express.
Yeah, 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 pretty much. And nice guy. His wife was there, and and then when he went to prison, everybody would go over to the prison with food because they didn't feed you at the prison. Your company would have to go over there and provide the food and the whole thing. So it was just a terrible, terrible situation. But a big lesson for me. Be careful who you hang out with.
So you come back to the United States. What year did you join the FBI?
So 89. In 89, I went through the 89-7 new agents class down in Quantico. Yeah, and I was recruited while I was at graduate school in Arizona. And I think you know about this, that there was a Mormon FBI agent. Yeah, and he came into the school, and the CIA would come to the school as well. They were looking for people that had overseas experience, could speak some languages, and they would recruit heavily. And so this one agent said, "Look, you'll never get rich in the FBI, but you'll never be poor either. And think about it." So I went in under the Spanish language program.
So when you were in the police academy, Jodi Foster was sitting in your classroom doing research for Clarice Starling in Silence of the Lambs. That must have been a distraction.
It certainly was. Certainly was. Even though she sat in the back of the room, you want to see all these swivel necks turning around trying to catch a glimpse of our classmate. She actually, for I think like 3 weeks, went through classes with us. She went through the defensive tactics. She would go out on the runs with us. So we had a run called the Yellow Brick Road. I think it was like a K or something like that. She actually went with us on the bus, one of these, what is it, Yellowbird school buses. And she sat next to me, by the way. She sat next to me. And I tried talking to her. I was polite, and she just kind of looked at me and blew me off, like, why are you talking to me? But that's okay. I mean, she's trying to get into her mindset of Agent Starling. I understand that. So, but yeah, she was in class for 3 weeks, and she attended our graduation at the end and sat right behind my parents, right behind my wife, and it was kind of a funny experience.
How did you think she came off as a young FBI agent, fresh out of the academy in Silence of the Lambs? I mean, was that accurate?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I liked her moxie. They had her set up as she was, let's say, insecure deep down from her roots, but outwardly she was tough and had moxie. I kind of liked the way they portrayed her in that, and she certainly took the role seriously. I mean, you could see it when she was in classes with us and in the gym with us. She took it very, very, very seriously.
How long is the FBI academy?
When I went through, Vic, I think it was maybe 4 months. I went in August, yeah, and August, beginning of August, and came out in November. Got out in November, so about 3.5, 4 months.
Can you describe to our listeners and tell them what Hogan's Alley is and what that training is like?
Yeah, no, Hogan's Alley is, they built this kind of real life type place with a movie theater with a bar. They'd actually had a bar in there, some homes, and I believe they this whole thing was created by someone in Hollywood that they contracted with to put up
That
this
makes
kind of
sense.
village or a fake town, if you will. And what I liked about it is they would put you into these scenarios, with other agents, and they would pay local people from Virginia, from the adjoining communities. They would pay them to act as bikers, outlaw bikers, whatever, criminals of all type. And so when you went into situations, and you would always huddle with your legal counsel first. We had legal counsel, and we would prepare, okay, you're going to take down these four bikers. They're at this bar. We have an informant. The informant will tug on her ear. When you go in there, then pull the jukebox, the cord out, and arrest these mopes. And these were the types of scenarios that we had. And sometimes they would pull out a pistol, one of these toy guns, and not all of a sudden everything, the dynamic was ratcheted up, and it was a great idea, and it really helped us. And in fact, in one case that I ended up working, I for in the mock-up that we did in this scenario we did in arresting these bikers in this loud bar, I was criticized heavily by our legal people, saying, Strange, when you go into a situation like that in a bar where you can hardly hear and it's raucous, and you're going to do an arrest in a bar, the dynamics very dangerous. He said, first thing you do is you pull the plug in the jukebox,
Yeah.
you stop, which I did not do. So I was chastised for that. And then later in Newark, I got in a situation in a bar, almost same type of situation. I remembered. I took the plug out, and everything worked out. But these are just little things that you would learn doing these scenarios, mock-up scenarios.
So, what was your first assignment out of the FBI Academy?
Right. So I remember they came in at the end, and they said, "Okay, all right, we're going to tell you where you're going now. We've just found out where all you agents are going." And we had been given choices, and you would write down the first three choices where you want to go. And I wanted to go to New York, Vic. Obviously, I'm a New
Sure.
Yorker, so
Yeah.
and I was interested in kind of the foreign counterintelligence work and spies, and so the New York office had that reputation as the flagship for this type of thing. So my heart was set on going to New York, to the New York field office. So you can imagine how I felt when they said, "Strange, you're going to Newark, New Jersey." I'm like, huh? Newark? And I just, I was like, no, I don't want to go. I'm going to quit. I'm not going to do that. But, and in fact, it turned out to be one of the best things that happened to me, because instead of going to Newark and being one of thousands of new agents, and most likely being assigned to the applicant squad for 6 months to a year, going out, okay, you're applying for a federal job. What's your name? What's your rank? That type of thing, which would have been deadening to me. Instead, they said, you're on the JTTF. And I said, wow, that's okay. I'm interested again. I'm interested. And you'll be working Middle East terrorism and domestic terrorism. And by the way, you'll be, since you have Spanish, you're going to be the alternate agent for Cuban intelligence matters. I mean, they had a guy, a native speaker. He was the primary, but I became the alternate. But I was not greeted. So let me put it this way. My supervisor did not put his arms around me and say, welcome to the squad. In fact, he said, I don't know how you got here. And if it were up to me, you wouldn't be here. You'd be doing applicant work. So that was my first introduction to the squad. Okay, those were his thoughts. That's fine. But I certainly got right into the work. We had a squad called C, and these men and women were out there. They were doing it. They were doing it. You had to bring your A game right away, because there was so many violations, so many terrorists or links to terrorism and informants out there, and we handled all kinds of groups. From Abu Nidal to the IRA to Jewish Defense League, and everything in between.
Can you comment or speak a little bit about some of the cases you worked on?
Vic, one of the first things I worked on was I was asked to go on a protection detail for a Russian defector, and I was asked by the adjoining squad. They were a counterintelligence squad, C9. We were C10 and we were next to them. And they said, my boss said, this would be a good experience for you. You'd be babysitting this defector, and the Russians are not happy that he defected. And,
Oh
uh,
no.
y- they're probably out looking for him. And so, you need to protect him. So I did this on and off for about 6 months. I got to know this fella pretty well. We became friends, if you will. And there was some funny comic parts to it. There was actually one scary part because this guy he was drinking heavily, and I get it. The pressures that he was under, and that he had left his family back in Moscow as well. So here he was alone. I'm sure he regretted what he did at times. Other times he was, I'm pro-American. I'm doing this for you, for my new country here, this type of thing. But he was a very complex character. Went through one or two PTSD sessions, PTSD experiences with him, where with just a little bit of alcohol, he would just go like he was in some cave in Afghanistan. And what he told me is that he was with the Spetsnaz, like their Green Beret in Afghanistan, and he'd been in a terrible firefight in a cave, lost a lot of his men, and a lot of killing and stuff like that. So in the end, and then this was, I mean, it's tragic. I mean, I would see the CIA would come into the safe house, and they would basically get as much information as they could. We would get as much information as we could, and then finally he was rotated out to, I believe he ended up in DC. And then the next thing I know, my friend over in the C9 squad says, "Here, this is from Nikolai, a letter from Nikolai. He's dead. He just died." And I'm like, "Holy shit! Are you kidding me?" And I said, "Russians, KGB," and he said, "No, I don't think so. I think he drank himself to death. And here's his letter. This is the last letter he wrote, and it's to you." And so I'm like looking at this letter, and and it was kind of mostly an incoherent letter, but there were things in the letter where he said, "I miss you, and I'm glad I met you," but other places where he rambled. It was tragic. The relationship was sad, just sad.
You bring up the Russians. My old precinct in the Bronx had the Russian embassy,
God, wow,
big one. And I mean, it's a fortress, takes up 2 city blocks.
yeah,
There's a fence around it. I don't know if they still have it, but you had a post and a cop in a box on either side of it. And for all intensive purposes, that was sovereign Russian land. And we were always told if someone comes to the booth and wants to defect, get them out of there. Like bring them
wow,
to the precinct, call the FBI. And we used to spot the surveillance all the time and the counter surveillance. I mean, you'd see the gate would open, a couple of Russians would come out. There'd be
right,
a car all the way up the block. They'd follow them across the street from the embassy. We're definitely letting them know they were under surveillance. There was
yeah.
a lot going on up there.
Oh, absolutely. And I just wanted to add, there was one, and again, the title of that chapter, as you may know, is the M&M executive. And what we had to do was actually take him out on occasion. We did some sightseeing. One agent had a plane. One of our flight boys came over. "I've got a plane. Let's take him up. We'll go over New York. We'll go up to Poughkeepsie and back in a plane with this guy." But, we would also, he would say, "Please, could you take me out at night once? I'm going stir crazy in this safe house." And we took him out. We took him out. And, we had to be very careful. You didn't want to
Right.
let him escape. But I remember we went to this strip club, and, we're sitting there and we're having, maybe this was not too smart, having a drink with him. This dancer, a very attractive blonde lady, and he was a nice looking guy. Okay, he put the Brill cream on, and he looked pretty good. So the girl, took like a fancy to him, and she said, "What do you do?" And so he looks at me like, "What do I say?" And I whispered, M&M executive. You're with M&M, because there was an M&M plant nearby. And he says, "I am M&M executive." And the girl is like, "Oh, wow, you're amazing." But I thought that was cute.
At some point in your career, you meet up with the Blind Sheikh, who's responsible for a ton of things. Abdul Rahman during an operation. What was that like?
Well, that was amazing because a few years before that, I'm a civilian. I've just finished my career in Saudi Arabia teaching, and as I left Saudi Arabia, my first stop going back to the States was Egypt. And so, most tourists will go to the pyramids and to the Egyptian Museum or take a sailboat ride down the Nile River. No, not me. I was so into this new terrorism thing that I had picked up in Saudi Arabia that I wanted to see the stadium where Anwar Sadat had been assassinated by Islamic Jihad or Egyptian Jihad. And ironically enough, the sheikh was the person that had blessed and approved of that assassination. So now you fast forward, and I was out there, in this grandstand, the bullets were still there. I was poking my finger into the bullets. It was kind of like still fresh. It was just like 2 or 3 years before. And so now, fast forward, I'm on a street corner in Jersey City. I'm with the two or three FBI agents, two or three, I think they were INS guys, because they were handing over papers to the sheikh to deport him. So we all went out there with our vests on. We intercepted him and his driver, and now we're trying to give him the paperwork, his deportation paperwork. Of course, this is like poking the bear. It got pretty heated pretty quick, and I'm there. I'm doing the Arabic thing. I'm explaining, we are the FBI. We're doing this, that. Here are your deportation papers. Ma salama, sheikh. And he's like jawing back at me in Arabic. And the most insulting thing, I wanted to choke him. He said, "Your Arabic is shit. It sucks." But he used the word in Arabic, zift, which means your Arabic is like tar, which is like he's trying to say shit. So that kind of hurt my feelings too. I didn't like him for that. But yeah, very. It was a very tense standoff, and the bodyguard he started to push, and the INS guys are pushing back, and then the sheikh takes the paperwork and he throws it on the street. It just scatters to the wind. And anyway,
Well,
they shout out, "Okay, you've been served." Anyway, what do you do? You've been served. So that was ironic that I would find myself in that situation at that time with this guy. But he as you know, Vic, he was a very bad actor, very bad.
in addition to the Sadat murder, he was behind the 93 truck bombing of the World Trade Center and the murder of Monica Hani in a Midtown hotel.
Exactly.
Speaking of Monica Hani, did you have any and Sadat? Did you have any dealings with Ali Mohammed?
Right. I'm going to say this, not personally. However, I backed into Ali Mohammed. Now, this Ali Mohammed was a former Egyptian soldier, and he had quickly married an American lady. That happened a lot with a lot of our subjects. They would marry American women, maybe pay them. It was illegal. Anyway, so he ended up down at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, as a translator to the United States military. I mean, this was perfect. In the meantime, when he would go off on his, okay, I've done my work here, then he would go back to the Middle East, where he would become Osama bin Laden's consultant or working security for Osama bin Laden. And none of this was picked up by the military or by anybody else. And so it wasn't until I kind of went off on my own in New York City one night. I went over to Brooklyn to where Mustafa Shalaby, they were investigating the murder case of Mustafa Shalaby. Shalaby was another alpha male. He was the rival to Sheikh Omar, and Sheikh Omar had him murdered in Coney Island, and they've never found out. I mean, I have an idea who did it, but they never were able to prove that these people did it. But he was assassinated. But let me back up. So I go to the this is at night. I end up over at the 60 precinct in Coney Island at night by myself because I have this thing, there's something going on. I know that there's some links to these mopes, and somebody is coming up. He's giving firearms training to the jihadists, on Long Island at Calverton and some other people. And it's Ali Mohammed that's coming up, this Green Beret guy giving them training. And unbeknownst to us, he's on the weekends, he's coming in and he's in Brooklyn at the mosque. He's in Jersey City. Now, of course, we can't monitor these things all the time. Yeah, and even though we had some pretty good informants, they couldn't. So this guy would come in and out, and he was basically getting them prepared for jihad, is what he was doing. So I went over there, and I remember there was a desk sergeant, and he says, I don't get it. Why are you here? I said, well, number one, my dad worked here at one point. He was, on Coney Island. He was at the 60 here. And the other thing is, I'm interested in these mos, these jihadis. And he said, they're foreigners. Why would you care about foreigners? I said, because they're foreigners. That's why. And he said, no, have at it. So he brings out all these boxes, and I'm going through the boxes of the Shalaby murder and what was in Shalaby's house, in his apartment. And I'm looking. All of a sudden, I see these classified documents, secret documents from the military, from Fort Bragg, and I'm like one after the other, and I'm thinking, what is this? What is this? These are jihadis. What this stuff is coming from Fort Bragg. Now the ironic part was I had just a few weeks left with the bureau. I had taken a job with another agency, so I got as much information as I could. I went back to the squad and I said, look, I found something last night that is just unbelievable. There is something very wrong here. There's somebody out with connections to Fort Bragg. This really needs to be looked at. And these are military manuals, how to make these, how to kill these, all these things. So I left it with the squad, and I moved on to my next job, and nothing happened. And so this guy just kept going on and on and on. And with the embassies, in the end, he ended up, as an integral part of the bombings of the U.S. embassies in Africa.
Yeah, I mean, Ali Muhammad reads like a spy novel. He's an Egyptian military intelligence, supposedly had some involvement in the Sadat murder, comes to the United States, joins the army, becomes a drill sergeant, goes down to Fort Bragg. He's teaching Arabic and
Yes,
works at the Kennedy Center,
there you go.
special warfare.
You got it.
And like you said, he's popping up all over the place. And
Right.
then finally, when they grab him, he starts feeding them nonsense. Also about him, he would go back when the Soviets were in Afghanistan. He would
Right.
go back on his vacation and fight with the jihadists, and then come back to the United States and go to Fort Bragg. And nobody knew he was doing this.
Yeah. How was your vacation, Ali? Oh, very, very quiet.
Do you know whatever happened to him? I know
You
they
know,
grabbed him.
Yes, they grabbed him. I think they charged him with something, but I think he made some sweetheart deal. And that is one of the greatest mysteries in American intelligence. Where is he? What kind of deal did he get? We don't know what happened. But you really know your stuff there.
Well, I have a bit of an interest in it. When Monica Hani was assassinated,
Right.
a friend of mine prosecuted that murder.
Okay.
And I found this out later. I met this prosecutor years later. He was a heavy hitter with the Manhattan District Attorney's Office, since passed. But so Monica Hani is killed. They do a search warrant out in New Jersey.
I was part of that search. I was part of that search warrant.
Oh, were you? Okay. So he gathers all this intelligence,
Right.
and he's looking at it, and he calls. I don't think he called the Newark office. I think he called because he had a relationship, because the Manhattan DA's office is right across the street from 26 Federal Plaza.
Right.
And he's begging the FBI. He says, I've got all this stuff for a murder, but this is beyond the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. He goes, I've got fundraising. I remember him telling me this. He goes, I have all this stuff. He goes, and they said, well, send it to us. He goes, I've got file cabinets full of stuff. He could not get them to take a look at it.
Right.
And according to him, when the truck bombing, the 93 truck bombing, then they came over from 26 Federal Plaza and took everything out on hand truck.
Right. Yeah, I was actually part of that search. Syed Nozair was
yeah.
So that was one of my first cases that I worked on. And I just remember they were seeing, as we were pulling stuff out, there was some, again, stuff from military stuff. And I remember going to my boss and saying, look, I don't Arabic. I'm not fluent in Arabic, but I have some sources, and especially I have one source that would be able to give us kind of just what's going on with these documents, without a thorough, but just, hey, this one is interesting. And they said, no. They said, no, let it go. You're new, you're the new guy. And no, we won't do that. And that was a shame. And I think if we had my boss just given in and said, yeah, let's just take a look at these so we can paraphrase them or say, hey, there's something else going on here. This is not just a homicide. And then, it was frustrating because Borelli, NYPD, and, my father had a great relationship with Borelli and really liked him. But, I think Borelli said, this is just a homicide. And that's it. But you and I know it was much, much, much
Oh,
more.
yeah. During your time with the JTTF, how was the FBI's relationship with the CIA?
Yeah, not the closest. We did have a relationship with their domestic. They had a domestic person in the area, but that person you would just feed him, but he would never feed you back. It was always one way. All the information was going one way, and then they'd call you and say, "Hey, could you do a protective detail? There's going to be a meet that's going to take place here, and could you have a few guys and girls out there just to protect the perimeter?" That type of thing. So it wasn't.
It sounds like the NYPD's relationship with the FBI. We felt the same way. It was always going one way, and then they would show up and say, "We used to call you guys. And don't take this the wrong way, but we used to call you guys. Like, you would show up at 6 o'clock at night. Hey, that smells good. What are you cooking for dinner?" And they didn't bring anything, and it's like, why should we tell you anything?
Yeah, but we'll take the credit.
Right. Well, that's what it's about. At the end of the day, who, like you said, everybody wants credit for something.
Well, Vic, that's why I like the notion of the JTTF, because as you
Right.
know, we had some NYPD. Where we were was New Jersey State Troopers,
Right.
but again, so this was great. And I remember, we seemed to be working out of these different silos, and we weren't communicating. And Newark and the New York office, were kind of poaching sources and just we're not coordinating, and that was part of the problem. And I just
Oh,
remember
yeah.
saying to my boss, and I want to take a little credit for this. At least I was thinking in the right direction. I said, why don't we invite the New York office over to Newark in it was a Portuguese area there, the Ironbound,
Yeah.
and we'll have lunch. And we did. And so the New York supervisor came over, some of the agents came over, our agents came over, and by the end of the lunch, people are comparing notes and, hey, I want to help you. I know that source. Oh my God, this person, we were communicating, and it was a thing of beauty. And I remember meeting Lou Napoli and Kevin Corrigan. These were NYPD guys on the task force. Once you could put a face to a
Right.
name to a face, you know how that goes. So that's the way we should have been working all along, but unfortunately, we were not.
This might be in your wheelhouse. In March 2007, Red FBI agent Bob Levinson goes to Iran as a private investigator under the guise of working a cigarette smuggling case, which to me makes absolutely no sense. Soon after he goes over there, he vanishes, and he's never been heard since. The Iranian government denies any involvement, although there's been photos of him that popped up that were mailed to his family of him with a beard and looking old and like a prison
Yes,
jumpsuit.
yes, I
What's
remember.
your take on that case?
It was very mysterious. Like you said, cigarette smuggling over in the Middle East, and what the hell is Bob doing out there near Iran? That's a pretty dangerous country. These were I think these were little islands that would belong to Iran. Still, it's Iran. I didn't know. It seemed kooky. It seemed crazy, and it was tragic. In the end, he never came home, and he died over there. And I don't think we still know half the story. We've been pressing Iran for details. Of course, we don't have good relations with them,
Yeah.
so you're not going to find out. But it was very sad, and I just remember, as every year the date would roll around, and the FBI would read stuff, and the stuff I got from Director Ray. Oh, say a prayer. Hopefully he's live, and then in the end he died. It's
Did you
very
know
sad.
him?
No, I never met Bob. No.
On a side note of that case, the Levinson family received a 2.5 million annuity from the CIA in order to stop a lawsuit revealing details on his work in Iran to
Oh,
force.
yeah. Okay,
So
that might tell you something.
yeah, I pulled that up. I mean, it's on the internet, but
Yeah.
I mean that if the family isn't suing, the cigarette smuggling thing just doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, you would surmise that there might have been other things.
Do you know anything about the Monica Witt case?
I've heard the name, but I'm afraid I don't.
Monica Witt was a member of the Air Force, and she worked with military intelligence and had access to ongoing counterintelligence operations. She defects, a woman born in Texas. She
Okay.
defects and goes to Iran and starts providing them information on some of our air programs. I was just
Okay.
curious if you knew. You're a Middle East guy. I just figured you might know about that.
No, not that one. No.
After the FBI, could you kind of go into what you were doing?
Yeah. So after the FBI, I was actually recruited by former FBI agents who were working for the Agency for International Development. This is the one that has been recently gutted by Doge. In the Office of Inspector General, and they have these were like fraud investigators. And so I remember one of the agents came up from Washington. He was a former bureau agent, and he said, "Hey, heard about you. We'd like to get you, with us. Come on down to Washington D.C. We know that you've been overseas. You like overseas work, so we can do that for you pretty quickly, and we'd like to have you on board." And I said, I don't fraud is not my thing. And he said, "Don't worry, we'll teach you how to conduct fraud investigations." So that's another door that I went through. And the next thing you know, I'm down in DC and I'm working with them. And ultimately, it would take me to an overseas assignment in Central America. But I did work on some fraud cases, which involved Egypt and some venues in the United States. AID was this immense, monstrous donor of funds to the third world, and it was about third world assistance and development. So there were tons of programs, and so we were responsible for any fraud of those programs and personnel involved in fraud for those programs.
So now, working in intelligence and counterintelligence world, you get to see and hear things most of us kind of just catch a glimpse of in the news. We hear it, and if you have an interest like me, it kind of sticks with you. Let me throw a couple of things at you, and I'd like to know your take on it. What do you make of the Havana syndrome?
That's a great book. It's a great book written by Jeffrey Higgins. I say that in jest. Jeff has actually written a book called The Havana Syndrome, I believe, and he's a former DEA agent who grappled grappled with a bomber and diffused a bomb or something like that. I've actually met him. But it's interesting. I'm aware of the problems with some of our personnel from the embassy. They've lost their hearing. They can't think straight. There's some kind of apparently some kind of I don't know, some kind of microwave stuff that's being transmitted, by the hostile country, maybe Russia, Cuba, at some of our, and not just Havana. I understand that in some of the other embassies,
Africa.
yeah, you're right. This has also been reported. So beyond that, I can't say that I know. I know much more, but it's very scary stuff.
Do you think a lot of Soviet trained spies came into the United States during the Mariel boat lift?
I wouldn't be surprised. I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, they'll take any opportunity to do what they have to do to get their people, their spies into this country. And what I'm currently afraid of right now is with this open border with the former administration. My understanding is, and I saw this actually because I'm here in California, and these people came through San Diego, Chinese. Males of military age, single, and I saw their photos, and they look like soldiers, actually, and they're here in the U.S. 50,000 of them. So that scares the shit out of me. That really does. I hope someone's looking at them, and I hope ICE is cleaning that out. Because if they don't, and these are soldiers, good luck.
Well, what's your gut tell you as far as what do you think the government's doing to get them out?
I pray, I hope that they know where they are, who they are, and that they're working to get the majority of them out and maybe flip some of them to become informants. That's what I would be doing. But I haven't heard anything since. Once in a while, I hear government spokespeople say, or people in the media, commentators say, "Jesus, we have 50,000 circulating in our country, and this is worrisome."
But do you think they just run in and grab them and get them out of here? Or do you think they put them under surveillance and see what they're up?
I think it's a combination. I think they'll try to get them out if they can, and they'll try to flip them if they can, if there's something of interest, and have them work for the government as informants. I hope that's what's going on. I hope that's what they're doing.
Going back to the Russians a little bit, I watched a documentary, I think it was on Netflix or Amazon Prime. It's called Operation Odessa, and it was about a Cuban national, a drug dealer from Miami, and a Russian gangster who conspired to purchase a diesel Russian submarine for the Colombians to smuggle cocaine into the U.S. And one of the guys involved in this guy Tony Yester, he reads like a spy novel. And that's the reason I asked about the Mariel boat lift. He comes into the United States under the guise of the Cuban boat lift, gets involved in the cocaine thing, but he's got all these contacts all over the world. And I'm watching this documentary and he's talking about he's in this country, he's in that country. And I mean, he did the document while he was a fugitive, and eventually they tracked him down. They brought him back to Miami. And now it's like another one of those things. Nobody knows what happens to the guy. The guy had to, in my opinion, the guy had to have been trained by the Russians while he was in Cuba.
Sure, certainly that makes sense. That makes sense. But you mentioned the Mariel boat lifts. In my role with Cuban intelligence, and I have a story in the book called the Castro Brothers. And it's Castro Brothers sounds like a law firm, but it was probably one of the most comedic, funny things that ever happened during my career. And this was a walk-in American citizen. I'm not sure I can tell you his real occupation. When I wrote the book, the Bureau, number one, they initially didn't want me, they wanted me to take the whole chapter out. And I begged, I negotiated with them and I said, how can I keep it in? And they said, to keep this story in, you're going to have to change his occupation, change his name, change a little bit of what goes. And so I wrote something to that effect, which watered it down a little bit, but didn't take the essence out of it. So this guy was a walk-in, and he was a big time fisherman as well, and he was down in Cuba all the time. And so he had, because of his position and because of his love for Hemingway and that whole thing in Havana, they have a fishing tournament once a year where all over the world these fishermen come in and go for a prize, fish. And so this person walked in and said, "Hey, I'm going down to the Hemingway fishing tournament, and on the way, I'm going to be hanging out with my friends Raul and Fidel Castro. They're my friends." And there was this economic embargo going on, so I chatted with my boss, and he said, "No, this guy he goes down there at his own peril." So I looked at it as like we should seize the opportunity, and do something. But my boss said the only thing he can do is be a listening post type thing. If he wants to come back, number one, we can't task him with anything. And then he's committing a crime by going down there to begin with and the whole thing. But if he does manage to come back, we can listen to what he has to say. So this became like the ship of fools. Like just before this guy goes off down to Florida and gets on his boat to go down to Havana, he calls me and he says, "Ken, there's this guy from Israel. He's Jewish like me, and he wants to go on the boat with me, and he's a nice guy." And so I'm like, Jesus Christ, this is Mossad. Talk about ship of fools. So the next thing, I'm getting these. Anyway, I get a phone call 2 weeks later. I get a phone call from the Coast Guard, and they said, "We have your guy. We have your guy. We got him right here, and we're taking away his marlin fish. He caught one of the biggest fish in the tournament, and we're going to arrest him. But he mentioned your name and that he's working for you and he's doing things for you." And I said, "No, no, no." I said, "I know who the guy is. He's not doing anything for us." But he goes, "Oh, okay, okay. We won't arrest him then. At least you know him. Okay." We took away his rum. You got bottles of rum and this big marlin. We took away the fish. I said, that's good. I'm glad you did that. So the next thing, I get this, I get this tape. This videotape is mailed to my squad. It's to me, and it's from the guy that went down to Cuba, the walk-in, and it's a tape. And so I go to this little closet where we have this, DVD player, VHS at the time. So I put it in there, and I'm just watching this tape. I'm laughing my ass off, just laughing my ass off because it's so funny. Number one, he's at the Hemingway Museum, and then he introduces, "This is Teofilo Stevenson, the ex-boxer, the Cuban boxer." And there's Teofilo Stevenson. I'm like, holy shit, this guy was really telling the truth. The next thing you know, he's walking in a tunnel with all these military tanks and jeeps, and he's in a tunnel under Havana with the Mossad guy. I call him a Mossad guy, Israeli citizen. So it's him, and Raul Castro is there talking in English saying, "This, look what we have. And, if the United States, we can protect ourselves." And I'm watching this video saying, "My God, what are you trying to say here?" Well, it was passive aggressive stuff. He's showing us, we want to have relations with you, but hey, if you decide you're going to come here, we can protect ourselves. That's what he was doing in essence. And then it got bizarre, got totally bizarre. Next thing I know, I'm in an office with him. I'm watching this. it's him, it's the Israeli guy, it's Raul Castro, it's Fidel Castro behind his desk, and it's all being videotaped. And then, the cheers, they're celebrating, there's a cake, there's this and that, there's a speech. It's all for me. It's for me. And then Raul turns to the tape, Fidel's brother, and he turns to the tape and he says, Agent Strange, are you getting all this? I'm cracking up
Oh my
in the
God.
closet. Anyway, I went to my boss and said, "You're not going to believe this." So he said, "No, send it right to the CIA right away. Get this thing out of here. This is crazy stuff." But I know what he was doing. I know what Castro was doing. It was just that, at that time it was the Mariel boat lift, and we didn't like Cuba, and Cuba wanted to come back to the fold, and times were very hard, and so it was a passive aggressive message to the United States, and it would be sent through Agent Strange.
That's an incredible story. I wasn't expecting that one. That just kind of blew me away.
It blows me away to this day, and it's funny, Vic. I actually was giving some thought to reaching out to Raul Castro, who is still alive, although he's like 90 something, and just saying, "Hey, I wrote a book, and I'd like to come down to Havana, and I'd like to, just talk to you, now that I'm retired, and I speak Spanish and the whole thing." And I thought about it for 10 minutes.
I want to get to your book, but speaking of Silence of the Lambs, you reached out to retired FBI agent slash profiler Jonathan Douglas,
John
who
Douglas.
was a technical consultant and for Silence of the Lambs.
That's
What
right.
was that like?
Yeah, so we were talking about new authors and making your way through that whole labyrinth of publishing. So I had the book, and I was looking for, literary agents. I didn't know anything about it. I know John had done this wonderful book, Mind Hunter, a few years back, and it became a, Netflix series and all that stuff. So when, I knew a little bit of him, and then when I saw that he was from Brooklyn, I said, "You know
Right.
what? I'm gonna go for it. I'm
Right.
gonna reach out to him." Right. So we have a little directory here and of all agents and stuff. So I reached out, and he was gruff with me. And then I told him, "Look, I'm a novice. I'm new at this. I have this book. It's a true crime memoir. I don't know where it's going. Maybe a literary agent is what I should be searching for." And he listened, and you could tell he was kind of on the edge there, not sure if he wanted to help me or not. But in the end, I said, "Come on, John, I'm from Brooklyn." And he goes, "Okay, okay, I'll give you a literary agent." So he put me on to somebody, and it didn't work out. But he was kind enough to kind of help me along the way.
I- Ken, please tell us about your book, A Cop's Son, One G-Man's Fight Against Jihad, Global Fraud, and the Cartels.
Why, certainly. In fact, I just happen to have a copy with me.
Perfect.
I've always been a writer since I can remember, since I was a kid, and I always wanted to write some books. And as you know, my first book it was called "It's Your Camino." It's a travel adventure spirituality book. I self-published, and this was the walking the pilgrimage from France into Spain. It won a few awards, and it got me interested and compelled me to keep going, to keep writing. So that's what I did. And I always wanted to do a memoir because I thought, my experience is a little bit, it's unique. How many federal investigators have worked for three, I call them distinct and distinguished
Yeah.
federal agencies, and each one with its own culture, with its own discipline, and in the United States and overseas. So I thought, and I remember somebody asked, I was at a security company, and one guy said, "Hey, tell me a story. Tell me a story about one of the things you did." And so I told him the story, and the guy says, "Jesus, you should write a book about it." And then that was the germ that started it all. So I put this book together. Of course, my greatest influence was my father. So there's a chapter in the book about my dad. It's called NYPD Blue, and so the rest of it is around the career in the FBI, the Joint Terrorism Task Force, the global fraud component overseas and in the United States with AID, and then finally on the southwest border, facing off against the cartels, working with the Department of Justice and doing all kinds of cases from drug trafficking, public corruption, civil rights, you name it, we did it in El Paso and in California. So that's the essence of the book. I'm very thankful to two police commissioners who went through the manuscript and endorsed the book. And these would be Ray Kelly, Police Commissioner Kelly, who was a friend of my dad's and who I met once upon a time at one police plaza. And then Chief Bratton, Bill Bratton, who was NYPD, LAPD, and I actually met Bill Bratton at his retirement party here in Los Angeles. So these gentlemen, they got the manuscript. They said, yes, we will look at it because your dad was NYPD, but whether we endorse it, that'll be something else. And it came back and they endorsed it. So that was very, very nice of them. And that goes to that NYPD Blue connection. You can appreciate that.
I certainly can. What's the name of your book one more time, and where can my listeners pick up a copy?
Yeah, so A Cop's Son, this is one G-Man's fight against jihad, global fraud, and the cartels. It's carried by Post Hill Press, and you can get a copy on Amazon, Barnes & Noble. I also have an author website, which is www.kennethstrange.com. So you can find, I have a website with blogs, and so I write. I'm a regular writer, so I have a lot of stuff, a lot of blogs as well.
And at that website, my listeners can get a hold of you for any interviews and speaking engagements?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for reminding me. Absolutely. That would be the best way to reach out to me.
And what was that again?
Yeah, so it's www. Excuse me.
Kenneth Strange,
Okay, so it's www.kennethstrange.com.
Kenneth Strange, thank you for taking the time of speaking with us today.
A pleasure, Vic. Really, really enjoyed it.
Thank you. As always, I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in, especially my listeners in Chicago, Illinois, Sydney, South Wales, Orlando, Florida, Minneapolis, Dayton, Ohio, Glasgow, and Providence, Rhode Island. If you work in law enforcement or had an interesting criminal background, please drop me a note on Twitter or Instagram at Vic Ferrari. If you're watching on YouTube, please hit the like and subscribe button. If you enjoy the content, check out my Amazon author page where you can preview all my NYPD books for free. Just type in my name, Vic Ferrari, like the car. Thanks again, everyone, and I'll see you next week.